As the old politician once said, if there's one thing I'm better at than everyone else, it's humility. Yeah, right. In the previous session, we explored how important it is for our character to be guided by love. That's not just any love, but the kind of love that is selfless, sacrificial, and chooses to focus on seeking the best interest of the one we're loving. An important key to practicing that kind of love is humility. The Bible is full of passages commending the virtue of humility. And at least 3 times, once in the Old Testament and twice in the New Testament, we are told that God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now, the dictionary defines humility as possessing a modest or low view of one's importance. The concept of humility is kind of fallen on hard times in contemporary society. At the moment, it seems our society celebrates those who aggressively assert themselves, the tough guy who speaks his mind and doesn't let other people push him around, anything but humble. In fact, in some circles, humility is almost equated with weakness. But that's not how the Bible portrays true humility. Numbers 12:3 describes Moses as the meekest or most humble man who ever lived. And yet, think about what Moses was able to do. He not only stood up to the most powerful ruler of the most powerful nation on earth at that time, the Pharaoh of Egypt, but he also successfully led over 500,000 nomads through the desert for 40 years and kept them all moving in the same direction. Only a strong leader could have done something like that. So Moses shows us that it's possible to be both capable and humble. Why is true biblical humility so important to the development of our character? What does genuine humility look like? And how do we cultivate it in our lives? Let's tackle that first question at the start here. Why is humility so important to the development of our character? Well, think about why it is that God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. First of all, people who are proud tend to rely on themselves. Proud people don't believe they need any help. So as a result, people who operate out of pride find it's hard to admit that they really do need God. Unless we're willing to admit that we need God, we won't be able to accept what God has to offer. Things like grace, mercy, forgiveness, the spiritual strength to endure those situations in life that exceed our own capabilities. And we can go on. Those who are proud are like the drowning man who pushes away the lifeguard who's trying to rescue him. Instead, the Apostle Paul advises us to take a realistic appraisal of ourselves and our need for God. In Romans 12:3, Paul says, "For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, for God, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith." So it's not a sin to have an honest confidence in your abilities. But it is a sin not to realize that whatever your abilities are, we all have our limits and we all need God. The key is to look at our situation honestly and humbly. A little side note for a moment. Let me give you one practical reason that this is so important. In his book, Leadership Pain, Dr. Samuel Chan talks about some of the factors that trap both individuals and groups into these repeating cycles of conflict. Dr. Chan says that some people react to conflict by becoming what he calls blame sponges. In order to make the conflict go away, these people rush to accept all the responsibility for the problem, even if they're not really at fault. They say things like, "Oh, what have I done to make this happen?" Or, "If I'd only done my job, this wouldn't have developed like this." In contrast to the blame sponges, you have people who are blame throwers. These people never take responsibility for causing problems. They just project all the blame on everybody else. And that sets up an unhealthy dynamic where the true roots of a problem never really get addressed. It's only when we can all humbly make an honest evaluation of the true roots of a conflict that the cycle can be broken and we can move forward. And that's an example of part of what Paul means when he talks about sound judgment in Romans 12, verse 3. We seek to neither underestimate our own capabilities, or our responsibilities for that matter, nor do we overestimate them. Instead of overestimating our own capabilities or resources, the Bible encourages us to place our confidence in someone much more reliable. Ultimately, our confidence should be in God. as the prophet Jeremiah relates in Jeremiah 9, verses 23 and 24. This is what the Lord says: "Let no wise man boast of his wisdom, nor let the mighty man boast of his might, nor a rich man boast of his riches. But let the one who boasts boast of this, that he understands and knows me. And I am the Lord, who exercises mercy, justice, and righteousness on the earth. For I delight in these things, declares the Lord." So no matter how smart you are, how strong you are, or how successful you are, the truly wise person will base his confidence in a personal relationship with God. Likewise, no matter how competent or incompetent you may feel, through Christ, God's able to equip you for any challenge. In 2 Corinthians 3, verses 4 and 5, Paul says, "Such is the confidence we have towards God through Christ. Not that we're adequate in ourselves so as to consider anything as having come from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God." If my confidence is in Christ and not in myself, then I don't have to have all the answers because I trust that he does. I don't have to be in control because I trust that he is. I don't need all the attention because I want Christ to receive the credit. I don't always have to win because I know that in the end, it's not really about me, but it's about advancing Christ's kingdom. I don't have to worry about being adequate in myself because I'm leaning on Christ's resources and not my own. Grounding our confidence in Christ instead of ourselves frees us to really love and serve other people. In Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4, we're told to do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility, consider one another as more important than yourselves, not merely looking out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of others. Let's be honest, our natural tendency is to make ourselves the hero of our own story, with everyone else existing only to support our needs. When we understand that actually Christ is the hero of the story, then we're free to understand that other people don't just exist for us, but that we all exist to serve Christ's purposes. And this realization allows us to have empathy for other people, to see that we're on the same level. And it helps us to seek out what's best for them and not just what's best for us. So what does this true humility look like? Well, if you want a model for genuine humility, all you have to do is look at Jesus himself. Going back to Philippians chapter 2, Paul presents Christ as the paradigm for humility. In Philippians 2, verses 5 and 7, he says, "Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, as he already existed in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a bondservant and being born in the likeness of men." Now consider carefully what Paul says here. Paul encourages us to adopt the same attitude or the same outlook about life that Jesus Christ demonstrated. He is our model. And Paul points out that before the incarnation, before Christ came into this world, he existed with God the Father on equal terms. Here we're touching on that foundational Christian doctrine called the Trinity, how the one God has revealed himself as existing in three co-equal and co-eternal persons: Father, Son, and Spirit. Paul's point is that originally Christ shared all the heavenly power and glory that went along with being God's Son. Yet, in order to carry out the Father's plan to redeem us, the Son voluntarily set aside all those divine rights and privileges. Christ possessed equality with God the Father. Yet, Christ did not consider that equality as something to be held on to. That's the actual meaning of the Greek word that's usually translated as grasped. It means not that he reached out and took it, it's that it was something to be held on to. He let go of it. Instead of doing that, Christ set aside those, instead of holding on to it, Christ set aside those divine powers and privileges in order to take on a human form in what we call the incarnation, which we're going to be celebrating here in just a few weeks as we celebrate Christmas. Now, think for a minute of the kind of humbling that must have taken place in that process. Paul compares it to coming off the throne of heaven in order to become a bondservant, who usually, that was one of the lowest ranked servants in the Greek household. You remember a show that used to be popular a few years back called Undercover Boss? On that show, the CEO would disguise himself and pretend to be an entry-level employee in his own company. And that way the boss could see what life was really like for his frontline employees. Now take that concept and extend it to a cosmic scale. Then you'll kind of have an idea of what the incarnation was like. Think for a moment, where would you and I be if Christ had insisted on sticking to what was rightfully his? As Paul says in Philippians 2, verse 8, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death on a cross. Christ's active humility did not stop merely with setting aside the use of his divine powers and prerogatives. Christ's humility actually led him to experience death. Now think for a moment about the fact of Christ's death. Think about what it means for the Son of God to die, for the creator of life itself to experience death. Now, think about the manner of Christ's death. We human beings have dreamed up some pretty awful things to do to each other, but there's probably never been a manner of execution more humiliating than crucifixion. Besides the intense pain and physical suffering that was inflicted in this slow, excruciating process, the victim often was hung naked in public view along a major thoroughfare, therefore subject to gawking, humiliation, and verbal abuse by the passing crowd. And we read about all of that taking place in the gospel accounts of Jesus' crucifixion. Consider also the reason for Christ's death. Ostensibly, Christ suffered this humiliating, painful death for a crime he didn't commit. It was pretty apparent to everyone who looked at Jesus' case honestly that he was an innocent man. And yet, he was convicted and condemned for the crime of sedition, in effect, for being a rebel. Think of the irony of that. Christ suffered this fate in place of people who actually deserved it. Who are the true rebels? We are. Not against the state of Rome, but against God himself. We're the ones that deserve to suffer such a humiliating, awful death for our treason. And yet, Christ voluntarily allowed himself to be subject to this fate on our behalf as part of God's redemptive plan. He took our place. Now, how many of us would volunteer to suffer such a fate for such undeserving scoundrels such as ourselves? I mean, really, most of us won't even get our hands dirty to help a stranger change a tire. Most of us won't humble ourselves enough to, as the saying goes, eat a little crow in order to settle the dispute with somebody else. Jesus took on what we deserved on our behalf. Jesus' sacrifice for our sake is humility personified. And we see humility demonstrated in that sacrifice. And in Jesus' sacrifice, we see selfless, sacrificial love expressed on our behalf. And Paul tells us God the Father responded positively to Jesus' sacrifice. In Philippians 2, verses 9 through 11, we're told, for this reason, also God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow of those who are on heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So as Jesus underwent this humiliation for our behalf, God restored him to his place of pre-existent glory. He has vindicated Jesus by raising him from the dead to show that he really was the Son of God and that he really did have God's power working through him. Now, how do we, thinking about this humility that Jesus demonstrated, how do we cultivate this kind of humility in our own lives? Well, first we focus on the example of Jesus, and then we imitate what we see in that example. To be honest, sometimes it can be hard. Sometimes it can be humiliating. Sometimes it's even painful. And always it's costly. It costs us something to humble ourselves. We have to give up something, even if it's just giving up our position or giving up our rights or giving up the position to judge somebody else for something they've done by forgiving them. In the end, however, God gives grace to humble. George Mueller was one of the most visible Christian evangelists in the 19th century. Among his many accomplishments, Mueller helped found the Plymouth Brethren. He ran an orphanage that cared for over 10,000 orphans during the course of his lifetime. He established over 100 schools that offered a Christian-based education to over 120,000 students. Somebody once asked Mueller the secret of his success, and Mueller is said to have responded, there was a day when I died, utterly died to George Mueller, his opinions, preferences, taste, and will. Died to the world, its approval or censure. Died to the approval or blame, even of my brethren and friends. And since then, I have studied to show myself approved only to God. In other words, there came a point where he humbled himself. He realized he wasn't the star of the show, that Christ was the one who really counted, and he set himself to follow Christ. If you want to be humble, truly humble like Jesus, you have to die to yourself. You have to take up your cross, which means you forgo any sense of rights or privileges, and you have to start following after Jesus, imitating his example. That's one of the reasons we do these videos, to talk about what that means. And I encourage you to go back and view some of the other videos in this series on this playlist. If you have questions, you can reach out to us through the email addresses on the screen, pastor@newsalembaptist.net. We'd love to hear about your story. Love to share with you how you can continue this journey of following Jesus. And join us next time for our next study as we talk about the importance of Christian character.